we don't have all the answers. There's a lot that Carmen has to continue to work on. And I think if we're always working to improve and innovate, then we're in a good place. If we ever think we're there, that's when that's a red flag, right? Nonetheless, I think we work hard to make sure that we are, first of all, seeing kids and making sure they feel seen and feel heard, feel a sense of belonging. That is really powerful for just a human being, whether they're 8 or 18 or 38, right? And then within that space, and COVID, I think, brought this to light more than anything else did, is the mental health and the emotional health of a kid. If they're not emotionally present and regulated and mentally healthy, it's really hard to learn anything. You're not present, you're not there. So we can't control whatever trauma or life experiences a kid brings into the classroom. But what we can do is recognize it, name it, and not use it as an excuse, but say, great, how do we help you? Because that is the foundation of those soft skills. Because whether you have trauma in life or you've been able to avoid it, dumb luck, self-awareness, self-control, and resilience are foundational. It's going to happen to you every day in your life, sooner or later. Maybe not every day, but sooner or later. And so how are you going to respond when somebody says or does something you don't like, or things happen that are out of your control? And so if we can work with kids in that, starting at 4, 5, 6, 8 years old, makes a world of difference.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. Now, I'm incredibly excited because I have Aaron Lippman here today with me. Now, this is an important conversation because Aaron is the CEO of Carmen Schools. Aaron, welcome to the show, man.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Keaton.
This is going to be a great conversation because, in today's conversation, we're not only going to cover why you do this work, what your Hart Hustle is all about, but we're going to talk about redefining education, ownership, growth mindset, real world relevance. We're going to talk about leadership and emotional intelligence. And we're going to talk about addressing challenges in modern education. But before we kind of get into that, man, how's your heart doing today?
It's good. It's full. It's heavy, but it's all right. It's been a day.
It has been a day. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that there's a lot of people at the time of recording this who are kind of battling with some of the expectations and the challenges that we're going to be facing kind of like as a society and a country. I'm not sure what side of the political landscape that you kind of ride on, but today is the day post-election day at recording this. Donald Trump has just been announced that he's going to be our new president-elect. And that's a really challenging time for a lot of people, especially when it comes to, mental health and the sense of community that it seems like we need a little bit more today.
Yeah, I would agree. And, Carmen Schools are a non-political entity, and we have people that work there, families that we serve are across the political spectrum. For us, what matters most, I know we'll talk about a little bit, is kind of the values that we live by and wanting our students and our staff to see leaders that look and sound like them and leaders that reflect, empathy and kindness and a desire to treat people with equity and respect. And that's what matters most, I think.
I completely agree. You being the CEO of such an important institution that's molding the minds of the next generation, why is this work so important to you, Aaron? How did you get into this space? Or were there any early, I would say, life experiences that kind of pushed you down this path?
Sure, I'll be upfront. I'm a pretty blunt individual. I've always been a bad student. So I grew up in New York. My mom was my middle school science teacher, phenomenal educator, great human. And in her class, I did well because I found connection, purpose, relevance to the things that she was teaching us. And she allowed students the opportunity to be curious. In a lot of classes growing up, that wasn't the case. And so I acted out. I had a big mouth. I got in trouble. I didn't see the value in what I was doing. And so I wasted that time and some of those opportunities. And so as I got older, always felt a strong connection working with kids and those who have kids as kind of the priority in their lives. But I'm like, there's a better way. There's a better way for kids to experience school, because maybe it's true for you or your listeners, definitely true for me, that as I got older, school became less important and I was less motivated. And you're a kindergartner, first, second grader, you're always excited. But schools sometimes kill that, and it should be the opposite.
How was that experience growing up with a mom who's a teacher, right? You perform well in her class, but not well in others. What were the kind of conversations that you had? Because I think that there would be, at least from my perspective, there would be a high standard, right, for education. Were some of those early days kind of challenging for you and kind of challenging for your mom?
They were. It's hard to know. I'm a parent now, so I have a better sense. But my kids are better students than I was. Um, but every night it was we got Spanish homework, we got math homework. You got to read, you got to do these things. I was always naturally aligned to reading, writing, social studies, so that was easy for me. But everything else was a fight. And for my mom, it was like, look, you may not like this, but this is what you need to do because you need the skills and the mindset and the behaviors to be successful after middle school, after high school, after college. And I was fortunate that all the adults in my life were role models for educational excellence. They'd all graduated college, most had advanced degrees. They were living middle or upper middle class lives. So I grew up in a privileged community, and I knew that education was core to all of that. So it was baked into who I was, but I fought it. Man, did I fight it.
Man, I felt the exact same way. I was never a good student. I got C's and D's. I was actually on the honor roll the final semester of my high school my
That's
senior
growth.
year. My mom was so happy. I was like, I told you I would make it happen for you. But it was interesting because I felt disconnected from school. You used that word intentionally, disconnected from school. I felt the exact same way because it just felt like I was never truly engaged in the classroom, or I couldn't really understand how these things were tied to the bigger picture. And I feel like a lot of students struggle with that in environments where teachers maybe aren't motivated, or they just don't have an understanding to why this is important for the future.
I think you hit on something really important. And this is no criticism of the educational institutions that prepare educators, but it's a lot of pedagogy or, um, what is the thinking behind why you're doing something? What does the research say? What is your approach? And historically, it's been a lot of sage on the stage, and students are passive in receiving information. And so, as a student in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't internet access the same way. So, I had to be a vessel to be filled, was the way a lot of educators looked at it. I wasn't ready for that. I had questions, I had concerns, I wanted to talk about it, I wanted to have real world relevance, and those things were rarely offered. And now, from the internet age on, now with AI especially, all the information is available in my back pocket. So I don't need the information. I need to know how to access it, what kinds of questions to ask, what kinds of problems to solve, how to understand the difference between fact and biased opinion, and then be able to use that to make informed decisions in whatever it is I'm interested in. And I think that's a huge pivot for educators last 20 years, and that's accelerating as we move forward. And as a kid, I didn't have that.
I had a revelation. I think I was a sophomore or a junior in high school, and we were doing a big research project. And part of the directions were go to the library, use the Dewey Decimal System to be able to find the information, bring the resources back, cite your work, XYZ. And I thought that there should be a class about resource allocation. There has to be a quicker way than spending my time going down to the library, looking through the Dewey Decimal System, and then grabbing these, I would say, recited articles or passages from these different books. But yet the internet is at our fingertips. Why are we not being taught to use these resources effectively? And it seems like that's kind of like a lesson in critical thinking.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something that is key to unlocking like the potential for students to engage with school differently. So again, a lot of educators, well-intentioned, hardworking, thoughtful humans who are not sure how to give up control and be kind of a guide on the side, a facilitator of learning, as opposed to the one controlling it. And so in teacher education programs, that's not really what you do. When I was a student teacher, the teacher who I worked with, wonderful person, ran a good class, very traditional. They had control, and the students were there almost like by accident. It was about the teacher when it should be about the kids. And so in some schools I've worked at, we've used things like Google search optimization, where you can, for example, if I want to learn about the country of Iran, if I'm doing that through a US server, I'm going to get US answers. If I change the structure so that I am doing it through an Iranian server, then all of a sudden the 1979 revolution wasn't a bad thing. It was a moment of great success in Iran. So it's about knowing where to find the information and how to use something like the internet to get accurate information. And we don't do that very often because it's not something we're taught in school growing up or something that we're taught when we are preparing to be educators in college or grad school.
Talk a little bit about why that exercise is so important, because this is the first time that I've heard somebody who's in the education space talk about accessing a foreign server to gather information about a specific event or an opportunity or, something that happened in history. Why is that so important?
So I go back to what I said a few minutes ago. There's so much information out there in the world, right? When I was a kid, I had the library, I had magazines and books, TV, and then siblings and friends who gave me information. Now you have endless opportunities to find information. But how do you know what's real? How do you know what's factual? So you have to know how to ask the right questions. So use AI. There's a million ways AI is going to be relevant in our lives, whether we like it or not. It starts with asking the right questions. And as you iterate through an AI experience about making the best apple pie, you refine your search queries, and that gives you better information. Well, Google's been around for a long time, and there are advanced search options that exist, but most people don't know they exist, don't use them because they're just used to, it pre-populates. I type in a B and all of a sudden it's Bob Marley baking or whatever I've been interested in, and it is an echo chamber of the information that I'm used to searching for. The algorithms are not meant to open it up to the world. I have to ask the right questions to do that. If we don't do that, then all those resources are just untapped.
How do you think about that echo chamber? That was a topic that I really wanted to dive into here today. I was listening to a podcast where they were using the exact same terminology, but they put it into words of cognitive bundles. When we go out into the internet, these algorithms and other things are so optimized at showing you what you engage with that when you search things, they're going to show you things that are similar to what you've engaged in the past. Great for finding more things that entertain you, but not great for being able to round out your mindset of information. What is an echo chamber, and why do you think that those are so dangerous for diverse perspectives?
Well, I think if you start with like an echo chamber in education, you know, lots of schools and organizations are doing similar things. And it's easy to focus on what's wrong. Teachers don't get paid enough. The hours are hard. You have to be more than just a teacher. You have to be a social worker and a doctor and a mental health professional. And it's a lot of times ends up being what's easier for adults than what's best for kids. Even though that's not what the adults want, you just kind of go with the path of least resistance because the job is hard. And great schools exist all over, but we're not always intentionally learning from those experiences or those places. That's an education. Then if you think about the world at large, for whatever reason why people elected Trump over Harris, the algorithms that run all the social medias all work on similar algorithms that say, great, we're going to give you more of what you're interested in and connect you to more people that see the world the same way you do. And then all of a sudden, I spend a lot of time online instead of in the real world. I'm not having conversations with the real people about real things. I'm having conversations about what I'm interested in with the same people that are like-minded. And then that's it. So I think that when we think about how we're educating kids, it's seeing all sides of a situation. It's asking questions. It's being able to say, oh, Keenan and I, we don't agree, but I can respect you without getting into conflict with you. And I'm not trying to prove my point of view, I'm actually listening to you. And then what you said is going to be relevant. I'm going to go out in the world and like find out more information about what Keenan said that I never knew about. But if you're in an echo chamber, that does not happen.
I had an amazing CEO out of Indiana on the show last week. His name is Matthew Perkey, and we were talking about the differences between difference and division. It's okay for people to have differences because differences means that there's an opportunity for us to seek to understand, for us to find out more information about someone's perspective, and there's a curiosity that comes along with that. On the other side of differences is division, where it's us versus them. It's the othering that we're so good at here in America. How is our education system supposed to cultivate conversations about differences rather than division? Is that a role that the education system is supposed to play, or is that supposed to be just in our public societal lives?
I mean, I think it has to be both, right? I mean, I was reading a stat at some point. It's something like 20% of a kid's life is at school. The rest of it is home, community, family, friends, whatever else you're doing. So we're a core component but it has to be a partnership between us and the families of the kids we serve. And I think it's hard because there are all sorts of, culture wars going on in the world. If I talk about students who might be non-binary in certain communities or certain school environments, that's, we can't go there because that's going to lead to all sorts of issues. And so whether it's the school board or the administration or the families who are pushing against it, it makes it really hard for schools to engage in like authentic, transparent conversation, allowing kids a safe space to explore the questions because the kids all have the questions. And we need to foster an environment that allows that. And we can, but not if we're getting accused of doing all sorts of terrible things to kids because we're giving them the space to ask those questions.
I think that's a really interesting topic because when I think about some of these pressing issues that we see in society, especially from like a younger generational perspective, a lot of these conversations are open to be had, but it seems like our older generations don't want to infringe or take the responsibility for having that tough conversation. And they're rather that social media and influencers and other people will have that conversation for them. And then institutions like you guys get in trouble for saying it's better for us to have these conversations in person rather than letting the echo chamber of the internet take this away and then formulate people's own ideas about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So it's a double-edged sword. It's like we don't want to have the conversation as, a family or community. You do it, but follow the certain rules. And there's not a lot of schools that have uniformity of thought or such a homogenous population that everybody sees the world the same way. And things change all the time. An 8-year-old kid suddenly becomes a 14-year-old and identifies as something different than what they did at 8, and their parents don't accept it. We can't just kind of force that kid to conform. If we do, usually leads to bad outcomes.
Man, and don't we think that a lot of these issues are somewhat just children kind of expressing and trying to figure out who they are? I remember when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, I was really confused about the world. And I was always doing different stuff and looking at different perspectives. And it seems like today, a lot of these hypercritical issues would be kind of solved with time if we just let kids explore who they are as people and then come back to a baseline. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes total sense to me. And look, this isn't new. The human condition is thousands of years old. So you go back to like Roman times, maybe there wasn't as much like equity or access for maybe women, for example, or people of color to engage in regular society. These same issues existed there that they do now.
Here's one of the things that I think is really important for us to talk about. It's like, when we think about our educational processes, we often think about, algebra, chemistry, XYZ, but it seems like there's a prevalence or a need for development of soft skills, right? Emotional intelligence is so much more important in helping people understand and navigate the complexities of society today. How are you guys helping formulate this next or curate this next generation to be curious when it comes to their emotional intelligence, especially in the education space? Is that something you guys focus on?
It is, and I'm not going to, pretend here. We don't have all the answers. There's a lot that Carmen has to continue to work on, and I think if we're always working to improve and innovate, then we're in a good place. If we ever think we're there, that's when that's a red flag, right? Nonetheless, I think we work hard to make sure that we are, first of all, seeing kids and making sure they feel seen and feel heard, feel a sense of belonging. That is really powerful for just a human being, whether they're 8 or 18 or 38, right? And then within that space, and COVID, I think, brought this to light more than anything else did, is the mental health and the emotional health of a kid. If they're not emotionally present and regulated and mentally healthy, it's really hard to learn anything. You're not present, you're not there. So we can't control whatever trauma or life experiences a kid brings into the classroom. But what we can do is recognize it, name it, and not use it as an excuse, but say, great, how do we help you? Because that is the foundation of those soft skills. Because whether you have trauma in life or you've been able to avoid it, dumb luck, self-awareness, self-control, and resilience are foundational. It's going to happen to you every day in your life, sooner or later. Maybe not every day, but sooner or later. And so how are you going to respond when somebody says or does something you don't like, or things happen that are out of your control? And so if we can work with kids in that, starting at 4, 5, 6, 8 years old, makes a world of difference.
And how do we do that? How do we prepare the next generation to be resilient when it seems like the environment of the economy and society in itself is always fluxing? How are you guys kind of tackling that?
I mean, I think there's simplicity on the other side of complexity, right? I think it starts with building an environment that is a values based environment. So at Carmen, our values are empathy, growth, and belief. And we have clear definitions for each of those. And those were decided by a large group of leaders in the organization, and then really intentional about bringing that down to every level. And it takes time. Those values are new for us this year. And it will take all of this year plus to build some sort of like consistency there. Then it's building relationships with kids through the lens of those values. Then there's structures in place that help. So for example, at Carmen, we have advisory. And advisory looks different in different places. For us, it's anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes once or twice every day where we're connecting with kids. Imagine it like the advisory teacher is your parent at school, and that's your family at school. That's a place that you can feel safe, connect, build relationships with others, whether they're like you or not. And in an ideal environment, and Carmen has done this intermittently, you have that advisor for 4 years. So you really are building a family. And then once you leave Carmen, especially in high school, that advisor is like a trusted adult that you have forever. So having trusted adults that you have a strong relationship with, having a space to engage in hard conversations and practice what it means to be to having self-control, to being self-aware. Those are key. You want to do those in classrooms too, but it's hard because there are community, district, state, federal requirements that say hit these goals at the end of the year, take these standardized tests. Puts pressure on administrators and teachers, but you can still find that space.
How are you supposed to navigate that? Right. We see a lot of language, a lot of people talking about standardized tests have been a way of doing things the old way, right? Kids don't perform well on them because of test anxiety and other things like that. So how are you supposed to integrate a new curriculum to kind of hit on the whole rounding of the human being while also still living up to those standardized tests that are so important?
I don't think it's easy. And I think the context in which you are educating kids matters a lot. So for example, on the East Coast, especially at a wealthy private school, like it is high performing colleges is the only answer. And so there's pressure on kids versus a public charter school like Carmen, where we don't select our kids. We get less per pupil dollars than the traditional public schools. And we are held to a higher standard because we have to be reauthorized based on our data every 5 years. And so the coin of the realm is your success in those tests, plus things that we should be measured on, like average daily attendance or certified teachers, things like that. Nonetheless, one, we know we're never going to get there. Like think about math or an English language arts curriculum. There are dozens of standards. Okay. Instead of breadth, that's an inch deep and a mile wide, go deeper, go slower. Let kids ask those questions. And along the way, take your time to make sure that they are feeling heard, feeling seen, feeling safe in their school, in their classroom. If that's happening, they're going to be learning a lot more than just checking a box at the end of the year. And if we don't hit that same academic, criteria for that standardized test in year one, it will build and we will have better outcomes for more kids over time. But you do have to trust that process a little bit. And you have to be intentional on being grounded in those values and those systems and structures. And I think the most important part after that is you have to have all the adults in the building on the same page, right? Like you can have your own view of what it is to be a teacher in a school, and that's fine. But when we're hiring for fit over performance and saying, all right, Keenan, you might be the world's best math teacher, but you got to buy into what we're selling around what we think about kids and how we're going to approach every day. If you do that, it's going to be great. If you don't want to do that, that's okay, but go teach at another school because our school, our flavor is this. And so that fit, I think, is really important because changing the mind of an adult is a hard thing to do. I'd rather spend our resources on kids.
This is interesting to me because it seems like, especially in the world of education, from everything that I see from like the social optics of it, it seems like we have less and less teachers who are interested in coming into this space. So when you're hiring for fit, that seems really interesting to me because not everybody's going to be the right fit to teach these kids, which seems kind of like the opposite of what you'd be looking for, which is really interesting to me.
Well, I think, empathy is our first core value. And I think that's huge because life is going to happen, right? We had our quarterly data day. Our whole network team comes together, 250 people once a quarter to talk about the goals that we set and how we're tracking towards those goals, how we can support teachers in the work. And the work is hard. And there are so many things outside of your control. And there are so many teachers in environments where well-intentioned people are running those schools or those districts, but you forget what it's like to be a teacher. And so for us, it starts with empathy and saying to every candidate who wants to work in our school, or every employee who chooses to work at Carmen, hey, these are the things that are non-negotiable around our values, what we believe about children, how we ask you to engage with one another. Assume the best, seek to understand, be solutions oriented, right? Lead with empathy. If you're down with that and you are willing to grow in that, you're going to be a happier human working in schools, and we're going to be able to better support you. And then ultimately, like in any job, you're going to see more success, feel better about the impact you're making. And even though you're not making as much money as you want to, because you just aren't, you go home every day and you're like, all right, damn, I feel good about the work I'm doing and I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I might not be able to do this for 30 years, but I could do it for 5 or 10. And a lot of teachers are in environments where that's not happening, and they get burned out in 1, 2, 3 years, and then they're out and they're not going to come back.
What is the objective of what is the outcome that we're trying to accomplish when it comes through putting these kids through Carmen? Is it to go to higher education? Is it to have the transferable skills to be able to be effective in the marketplace? What are you guys really focused on?
I'm going to throw it back at you for a minute and then I'll answer it, right? I'm not avoiding the question. What do you want? When you were 15, 18 years old, what do you think you wanted or needed to be a successful human?
I think I needed the skills that were going to make me effective no matter what place I applied myself to. It wasn't so much about higher education, but I need to know how to be successful on the other side of that. And I feel like that's why I didn't get along with the education process so well, is because I couldn't create that connection. But that's just me personally.
I think certainly there's a personal side. There's always the individual component. But I think what we're about at Carmen is creating a life of choice and opportunity for students. Whether they're going to be first generation in their family to go to college, great. Or they want to be jumping into a career and making, 60, 70,000 when they're 18, 19 years old, great. For us, it's about a choice, a life of choice and opportunity, and being able to add value as you build a family, as you come back to a community, as a leader in your community, to make the world around you a better place, whatever that means for you. You can't do that very well if you can't do basic math, if you can't read and write, if you can't make your thinking visible in a way that shows the value you bring to an employer. Or even if you're going to be an entrepreneur on your own, you still have to be able to communicate your vision and then execute on it, or rally others to help execute on that. If you're able to do those things, and by the way, have self-awareness, self-control, and resilience to the ups and downs in life, you're successful, whatever your career choices are. And so for us at Carmen, that's key. And a big pivot that we're making now is we're 18 years in. 18 years ago, 2007, the world looked very different. And like a lot of high-performing public charters, it was college or bust. And we have I think we can hang our hat if on one thing, it's on the success of our kids graduating from high school, getting to and through college, and doing so with little or no debt because of their own accomplishments. But I think what's happened in the last few years, and it's happening more and more, is a lot of kids are saying, college is awesome, and I want access to it, but I want to go to career first. Because how many 18-year-olds know what they want to do in college? I was a history major. I know what I was doing. English majors out there, some kids are like, yep, I know exactly what I want. Good for them. Most don't. So if career is a first step, or family dynamics are pressuring them to make some money right off the bat, okay, then it's our job to give them exposure so they know what's out there. And then, by the way, in their back pocket, they have college access if they want it or need it later.
I mean, this comes back to the point of having that trusted advisor. Those conversations that you have through your education and process, get the conversation started about what do you want to do? Because that answer is going to be different for every student and everybody. And I feel like that's one of the things that I was missing in my educational process is no adult ever sat me down. Although I went to an incredibly well-known academic focused high school, all guys Catholic school, I never had that one-on-one attention for somebody to ask, Keenan, what do you want out of the next level? And I feel like it's that simple question that starts the mind and the gears running in somebody's mind about, what do I want to do at the next step? Is college for me? Do I want to go career first? Do I want to go travel and do those type of things? That's an interesting conversation, but there's also a lot of responsibility that we put on the younger kids to be able to make those type of decisions, but I don't think it's unwarranted.
No, I don't either. And I think it's really hard. Like, again, I came from a place where my family went to college. So my mom walked every step beside me, did a lot of things, probably enabled me a little to make sure I had access to college. A lot of kids don't have that. And instead of saying to parents, well, that's your fault, how do we walk with parents to help them help their kids? So at Carmen, I point a lot to our college and career team. So we have college transition coordinators who work in schools with kids, and then we have post-transition coordinators who work with kids once they leave Carmen to really make sure, what do you want to do? Here are some options. What's the right fit for you? Hey, I want to go to NYU because I'm interested in film. Awesome. Is your family going to support you traveling across the country like that? Think about the cost of going back and forth. Think about the cost, because at the end of it, you got scholarship money, but you're still going to owe X. Is that worth it, or is it better go to these other options because you like film a lot, but you're not sure it's a career? And so helping, I like big, I like small, I like this kind of weather. I want to be in a place that there's other people that look like me versus I don't care about that. And all of that is part of the calculus. And so we do a good job of walking kids through that and helping families, especially think of a family, 75% of our students are Latinx. A lot of them, their families emigrated from a South American country, Mexico. They may not have graduated high school. They may not have gone through 8th grade. They may not speak English. Navigating the U.S. system is foreign. So their kids have to be the emissary. So to your point, a lot of pressure on the kid. So those kids grow up fast, but they still need their parents to help them. They need their parents to support them. So what can we do to make that happen? We're not perfect at it, but I think it's an area of strength for us.
First of all, where was Carmen when I was going through school? Because some of these conversations would have been incredibly warranted. I mean, I've had some amazing leaders. I recently had this guy on the podcast named Kevin Irvin. He went to a school in the Bronx, ended up going to a charter school that was very well funded and got straight A's all the way through school, got into, I want to say 4 or 5 different Ivy League schools, but unfortunately never went because he couldn't fill out the FAFSA information. He filled it out incorrectly. No funding for school. Went through a completely depressive episode and ended up finding his way and working in the public school system in a different way. But he was the perfect example of somebody who was a first generation college student, was smarter than can be, but obviously didn't have the opportunity to take advantage of the next level of education because his parents didn't know how to go through that process either. This is a family experience for so many people, which I think is really important to recognize.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. And first of all, you seem like you're doing just fine. So I'm not worried about you. But what could have been done before you got to this point to help it make it easier, right? For you to not have to fight so hard to get where you wanted to go. And sometimes we can't control that, but I think we can help make the path a little bit easier for kids, no doubt.
So here's a question. You mentioned AI a couple times here today. Now, when artificial intelligence through OpenAI dropped in November of 22, it seemed like the education systems had 2 reactions. One was, keep this away from our students. They're going to cheat. Plagiarism's going to go through the roof. The other side was, maybe we should explore what this technology could mean to help our students do more efficiently. Which side of the camp are you on, and what do you think AI means for the education space?
Well, I'm definitely on the camp of it's a tool. If we don't take advantage of it, it's going to pass us by, and we're going to be shortchanging our kids, right? You know, I used to work as a teacher before the internet was ubiquitous, and saw the value of it. So AI is clearly like that on crack, right? I mean, it is next generation level power. And I think instead of being afraid of it, I'm no expert in it, but what I know is that it can make the life of a teacher, a student, anybody easier. So whatever it is that will help you navigate school, navigate the areas in your life that you're weaker in. You're a bad writer. You're not necessarily the most creative. You're bad at directions, whatever the case may be, take advantage of it. So how do we sprinkle AI into what teachers are doing every day? Instead of saying like, oh man, Keenan's going to cheat and have AI plagiarize his essay, say, okay, how do we have him use AI to write his essay? And then that's a starting point for him to then modify it. That's draft 1. He asked the questions. right? Now, how do we go to version 2, 3, and 4 that he has to do? It's his voice. He's the one doing the research. It's just like a lot of times when I would teach writing, we'd use Wikipedia. It wasn't the end all be all, but it was a starting point, right? Go to Wiki, read about Keenan Hart, understand his story because you want to write a narrative essay about him. Great. Now let's build off of that. I think I'm simplifying it, but I think AI is a tool that you can use in that sort of way. Plus, a million ways I'm not smart enough to think about.
I mean, but it starts with that mindset of curiosity that we have to be able to explore and see what this could mean to us rather than saying this is either good or this is bad. And I feel like it's right in the middle where the answer is, especially in a space like this, because you have a younger generation of people who are used to using these tools, generative AI, conversational AI tools. They're coming and they're not going anywhere. And so we need to adapt the way in which we integrate these into the experience of education, which I feel like is awesome.
I agree.
So here's the last topic I really want to kind of riff on. I mentioned a little bit about, it seems like through the social optics that we have less and less teachers who are coming into the space. How are you thinking about casting a vision at Carmen, plus all the other things that you're doing that gets this next generation of teachers inspired to come in and contribute so much of their time and their energy and do this hard work to impress the next generation on how they need to be influenced?
It's a heavy question. So there are some things that are just, right timing. So at Carmen, for example, we've never had our own facility. And we do for an elementary school, but that's recent. But we're building our own facility for the first time. And it'll be an 1,100 person high school. And we're able to design it soup to nuts. The colors, the windows, the layouts, the size of classrooms, how kids are going to go through lunch, the wiring, the IT, all of it. So that makes for a better environment for a teacher. Because for most of my teaching experience, I worked in places that had no AC, right? That intermittent heat would work. The windows didn't work. All sorts of stuff, right? So having an environment that is conducive to teaching and learning and respecting the profession, I think is really important. Now, we don't have all of our schools like that. We'll have one like that, and then we'll build off of that. I think showing respect to educators, if I'm answering your question correctly, showing respect to the profession and to educators and saying, look, we're not going to overburden you, but we're also going to be real. This is not a 9-to-5 job. I don't know, at least in the first 2 years of education, any teacher who can do it by showing up at 7:30 and leaving at 3:30, and that's it. So let's be real with our educators about what it is that the job entails. Let's listen to what they need and be empathetic to their life experiences. Let's not nickel and dime them on things like parental leave or mental health leave from time to time, knowing that we also have to operate school every day, even though they need that break. Let's make sure that we are investing in teachers and coaching them in a way that makes them better, supports their growth and impact, and provides, I wouldn't say upward mobility, but not everybody wants to be a teacher for 30 years. Some might want to pivot into HR, into administration, leadership, you name it. How are we building internal talent pipelines that say, we see your skill sets, we see your passion, how can we help you get there? And by the way, if you don't want to keep doing it at Carmen, that's okay. If that means you're going to leave us after 2, 3, or 10 years, let's maintain a positive relationship and let's help you get where you want to be. As opposed to it being this scarcity mentality of there's not enough math teachers out there, so we got to steal them and borrow them and pay them more to manipulate the system. We're still going to burn them out, so it won't really matter in the end. Again, I think that respect for education is powerful, and I think the funding is really a big deal, right? In Wisconsin, there's been growth there, and unfortunately, it's become a partisan endeavor where right now the Republican side of the legislature seems to be open to funding non-traditional schools like a public charter or a voucher school better than they have in the past. But I don't want it to be about your political party. And I don't want it to be charter versus public versus private. Not every charter school is good. It's not a silver bullet. Not every traditional public, not every private is good. But there are certain conditions that allow for a successful experience for a teacher and a kid. We don't have them all, but we're working on it. And there are many examples of them around the country. So instead of being fearful and saying, well, yeah, but you're stealing from the public, traditional pie. It's like, hey, you're serving kids well. You're growing good teachers. Let's borrow from you. We see that in all sorts of industries. We should be seeing that in education too.
Man, I completely agree. Well, I mean, it's easy to understand, Aaron, why you are the definition of heart and hustle because of how much energy and how much time you're putting into this space and just the passion that comes with impressing and influencing the next generation of not only students, but also the people who are in the classrooms educating and pouring so much into this next generation, man, is something that I'm incredibly appreciative for. You know, one of the traditions we have here on the podcast as we kind of land the plane is our previous guest wanted to ask you a blind question. Now, this is really interesting. So, what things right now give you hope? And what are you most optimistic about in your space that maybe you weren't 5 years ago?
Man, I love that question. And good shtick. Um, Before I answer it, I do have to say, as I don't want to be remiss. I'm the least important person in my organization. Everybody else does the work, like in that work every day, and they're who matter. And my job is to support them, make them feel seen and growing. So like I'm truly, I don't matter. They matter. I just get to be the face, right? Um, in terms of what makes me optimistic, it's always the kids. It's easy. Kids are kids, no matter the environment they come in. Their optimism, their resilience, their short memories for things that are bad or relationships that go sour, their curiosity, their enthusiasm, they keep me young, whether it's music or it's social media stuff or it's pop culture. They're the ones telling me about it. And then I'm cooler because of them. So endlessly optimistic. Every day is different. Every day is exciting. Every day is brimming with what good could come. And so kids are amazing.
Well, I love it, man. That's a beautiful place for us to be able to put a bow on today's episode. Once again, Aaron Lippman, thank you so much for joining us, man. The definition of heart and hustle, brother. Thank you so much for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.